Willkommen bei einer neuen Episode von Markenkraft. Für alle, die von Marken fasziniert und für ihr Wohlergehen verantwortlich sind. Welcome to another episode of Markenkraft. My name is Olaf Hartmann and my guest today is Professor Jenni Romaniuk. Jenni is Associate Director of the world-famous Ehrenberg Bass Institute of the University of South Australia. She's a research professor and author of two very influential books, How Brands Grow, Part 2, and Building Distinctive Brand Assets. She's one of the leading researchers on brand equity, advertising effectiveness, distinctive brand assets, word of mouth, loyalty, and brand growth. She pioneered mental availability measurement and metrics. Jenni was the executive editor of the Journal of Advertising Research and now sits on the journal's senior advisory board. Welcome, Jenni. It is really great to have you on the show and introduce you to my listeners in Germany.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking the time. Also, we just discussed the time difference that you're talking from. We're speaking with you, and you're in Adelaide, so that's 8 hours. We just found out 8.5 hours or 7.5.
So it's the end of my day. So the good news is I get to finish this and have a glass of wine afterwards.
Oh, wonderful. So let's try to make this a pleasant experience for you to start the evening. To warm up, I'll ask you a quick fire round of questions. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Beer or wine?
Wine.
Apple or PC?
Oh, Apple, definitely.
Intuition or big data?
Both.
Brand marketing, art or craft?
Neither. Science.
Porsche or Tesla?
I don't have a license, so neither. Whatever comes with a chauffeur.
USP or purpose?
Sorry, what was that one?
USP or purpose?
Oh, neither.
Great. So would you like to explore on that? No unique selling proposition and no purpose.
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends on how you define purpose. I mean, if you define purpose as if you're a for-profit business, your job is to have a sustainable revenue business that will stay in business for a long period of time. I'm for that. It's just been a bit hijacked between all these other things that I don't know that serves our economies well.
Great. So let's start with you as a person. I'm interested to introduce you because in Germany, the Ehrenberg Bass is really world famous. But to be honest, like from my view, it's not as famous as it deserves to be in Germany and the German-speaking countries. So this is also an effort to introduce your thinking and also your books and the principles that you have discovered with rigorous scientific research, and which is very valuable for all marketeers. But I would like to start with you as a person. So thinking back of your childhood, what was the first money that you earned?
Oh, I did all sorts of little jobs growing up, but my most memorable job was probably so we have football clubs, but it's Australian rules football, not your type of football. And they have like each club has their clubhouse where they serve meals and drinks in after games and things like that. And it was a ritual when I was a child to go to the footy game, and then you go to the club afterwards and have a meal and drink. And at the age of 14, I got a job working behind the bar, but making like soft drinks. So I would be the person, whoever the bar person got a drink, they'd say, get us a lemonade, get us a Coke, and I'd go over and do that. And get us, and I used to make these traffic light cocktails, which were sort of red on the bottom, orange in the middle, and green on the top, and learning how they got made. And that was a special art, until they discovered that it was actually technically illegal for me to be behind the bar because I was under 18. So even though I wasn't touching the alcohol, they discovered, oops, we're not allowed to do that. So I lost that job, but not through any fault of my own.
All right. And you remember what you spent the money on?
What did I spend the money on? In those days, I was a big fan of comics. So I really loved things like Archie, and yeah, I remember Archie being big comic when I was growing up, and I loved music. So ABBA was really big when I was growing up, and Sherbet, and I mean, it was a 70s childhood in Australia. So we had, it was quite simple, the things that we wanted as kids.
Yeah, right. And do you remember, like, was there like a conscious experience with brands for the first time? Was there any brand that had special meaning for you?
Not really. I mean, probably the brand that had the biggest meaning for me was, well, not the biggest meaning, but most memorable that carries on today was actually Kentucky Fried Chicken, because that was the one. We had Kentucky Fried Chicken, we had Pizza Hut, and they were the only fast food places. We also had obviously like local Chinese place, local fish and chips places, but they were like the name brands. And so my parents got paid every month. And, it was a classic working class sort of household. So when payday was, okay, we can have takeout on that night. And we got, as, people in the family got to choose what you wanted on that takeout. And they stopped asking me because KFC was the one I would always go for.
The mental availability was so strong that, did they push finger licking good back then already?
I remember it. I remember that for as long as I mean, yes, the thing I remember most is they used to sell corn on the cob. Yeah. And I used to eat it, but now it makes me throw up, and I'm not exactly sure what happened between liking it and hating it, but something did. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, brands weren't, I mean, there was a couple of other brands in high school, like we used to come to Adelaide and go shopping, and so Sports Girl, it was basically similar to Zara type of fashion type of things, but that was the Australian version of that. But remember, I was in Australia. We didn't have a lot of international influence. We had 2 TV channels. Only one had commercials. It was a very different, simpler existence.
Yeah, but that's the same thing. I was a child of the 70s as well, and we had 3 TV channels back then. So yeah, it was a little bit less crowded. And tell us, growing up in Australia and now today being a research professor and one of the leading experts for for consulting brands, how did that happen? How did you become the person that you are today?
Oh, it was a lot of accidents, really. I had no grand plan. I actually finished high school and couldn't get into physiotherapy, which was my first choice. I went to US as a Rotary exchange student, which is like a year high school exchange program, and couldn't work out what to do. And then there was this thing called occupational therapy, which is sort of like physio, but it's like rehab for people who get injured so that they can live independently in home and work, and you work with people with disabilities.
And today you help brands that are injured.
Yeah. But yeah, so I did that for a year and a half before I worked out that, I was either going to be really, really good or really, really bad, and I couldn't tell which. And then, I kind of went, and someone was doing a business degree. And I went, that's interesting. That sounds practical. So I changed to that. And then I only discovered you needed to choose a major while I was standing in line to enroll. And I'm just like panic. And this is a classic mental availability moment. All I thought was, I hear they do marketing good here. All right, I'll sign up. We'll do marketing. And so I did that as an undergraduate for the next 3 years. And then I decided to go traveling because I had no idea. I didn't really know what I wanted to work in marketing. And before I went away, Byron actually called me and said, we're starting a research centre here. Would you like to, come in for an interview? And I went, well, yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind, but I've just bought my ticket to go around the world and go travelling. So, yeah, no, not right now. And then when I came back 2 years later, and they did and this is the only time they've ever advertised in the paper offering Masters by Research scholarships. And so I saw that in the paper and went, oh, I'll apply for that. And so, yeah. And then I finished my Masters and went, oh, I don't know what to do now. I was going to go and do one of the Peace Corps sort of volunteers abroad, but I wanted to go to Central America. And that happened to be the 1 year they closed down the Australian Central American program. And so I went, okay, obviously not meant to do that. And then I got convinced to do a PhD. So I went, okay, this research thing's fun. I'll stay do a PhD. Finished my PhD in marketing and then thought, oh, I like being a PhD student, was going to do a PhD in maths. But then I got convinced to apply to be a senior research fellow and then, continued on from there.
That's wonderful. But isn't there some like often the grand master plan is invented afterwards? Is like I think Steve Jobs said that you live your life forwards and you connect the dots backwards, and isn't that also true for many brands, that just brands happen and then you look back and this was strategically planned and
there's easy to post hoc rationalize. So why are you successful? Because I did X, Y, and Z. And you see this, I mean, In Search of Excellence, the Tom Peters book, none of those companies are around, I think, right now. There's a real problem when we try to retrofit success from the successful, because we don't understand. It's classic now. You see it where people go, oh, look, these brands succeeded and they didn't advertise. And it's like,
right.
Yeah, because they didn't have the money to advertise. They succeeded despite not advertising, not because they didn't advertise. Yeah. You really get the causality wrong.
And nevertheless, they got famous because they were mentioned on the news or had some other way to create memory structures. Yeah, but isn't it like a little bit like watching clouds? I mean, like once you see something in a cloud, it's there. There's the spaceship and there's the face, and you immediately see it completely clearly, and you're 100% convinced that that's a face in that cloud. And that's a little bit like post-rationalizing brand success often. So that's I'm very happy that this journey by chance led you then to marketing in the end. And you already mentioned Byron Sharp. You wrote together How Brands Grow, What Marketers Don't Know, Part 2. And it on the first one it says is like, this book will change the way you think about marketing forever. That's a strong claim. So would you like to explore on that? Like how? What do people's thoughts, how brands grow, and what do they know after reading the book?
Well, that claim was actually on Byron's book.
Yeah, I know. The first one. It was on the first one. Yeah.
But it does. I mean, it's one of those things that it's to me, it's more like one of those magic eyes. Once you see things like Double Jeopardy, you can't unsee them. And you see them cropping up in all sorts of different places.
Okay, let's segue there. Double jeopardy. This is a term, just be aware that I think that all the terms that you're using, that you probably have talked about 1,000 times in England, Australia, America, and so on. Lots of these terms are not like common in marketing lingo in Germany. So keep that in mind. Like just maybe explain what's the law of double jeopardy.
Yeah, no problem at all. I like to be told when I need to explain them, because sometimes, can get a bit repetitive if you've heard it before. Double jeopardy is a law it's an empirical law that comes out of the data that says that small brands get penalized twice. They have many fewer users, and those users are slightly less loyal. So that's why it's called double jeopardy, because it's told from the perspective of a small brand. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reverse is also true for a big brand. A big brand's benefit twice. They have a lot more buyers, and those buyers buy them a little bit more. So, but then there's no sexy name for that, whereas double jeopardy. It was actually first discovered by a gentleman called William McFee. Well, a few, but William McFee was the first that really published it in 1969. And he found it for radio announcers. What he found was that the radio announcers that were known by fewer people were also less liked by the people that knew them. And he actually said, this is absurd. Why should the liking of the people who know a radio announcer be dependent on how many other people know the radio announcer? He when he first discovered it, he went, well, this is weird. And it turns out it's really just, it's a reflection of the varying customer bases. So big brands tend to monopolize like category buyers who only know the big brand. So when they're faced with a choice situation, they really only have the big brand that they can choose. Whereas the people who know the small brand also know the big brand, so they have divided loyalties because they can sometimes pick the big brand and sometimes pick the small brand. So the small brand, when it's in an Evoke set, has less chance of being chosen because it's in with more other brands, whereas a big brand is in more Evoke sets with fewer other brands and sometimes just by itself. So that's why it happens.
Right, and that's basically going against the marketing myth that small brands have can develop like this really strong loyal customer base and then grow out of the loyalty of these convinced and brand love is one concept that is connected with that. So basically, the loyalty that there was one of the myths. For a long time, all those loyalty programs were meant to grow brands, and that was one of the myths that you were busting with or like that the Ehrenberg Bass was.
Yeah, well, actually, Byron did his PhD in loyalty programs. It was on ViewNet, and what he found in his research was that the problem with loyalty programs is the selection bias. The people who have most to gain from joining a loyalty program are a brand's heavy buyers, and so your recruited base tends to skew heavy. So when loyalty programs first came out, people thought, they would do a profile of the buying of people in the loyalty program with the buying of people who are not in the loyalty program. Wow, the people in the loyalty program buy so much more. Must be because they're in a loyalty program. No. But what he did find is that loyalty programs can act as a bit of a protection against, say, price promotions from a competitor. So in his work, he found that, for example, in a fuel market, because petrol, fuel, gas for cars is a very price competitive market, the customers that were part of the loyalty program were a little bit less reactive to a competitor's drop in price than the people who were not. So there's a little bit of a protective effect, but there isn't much evidence of a loyalty effect from joining a loyalty program. But the problem with loyalty programs, of course, is not setting it up. It's if you want to dismantle it, because people don't like them being taken away. And very rarely do people think about the cost if you want to get rid of it. And that's you have to, before you start a loyalty program, you don't just have to think about the start. You have to think about, well, what if we wanted to wind this up? What would be the detriment that might come out of that?
It's like the withdrawal from a drug. It's like a drug. Once you start using it, there's going to be withdrawal symptoms once you decide to stop.
Yeah, well, we know people. I mean, the old adage, people prefer people are more sensitive to losses than gains. People don't like things taken away that they're used to.
Right. And from the law of double jeopardy, what are the consequences then for small brands that want to grow and the opposite position, big brands that want to stay big?
It paints a picture of how brands grow. I mean, the law of double jeopardy is a very small part of a bigger model of brand performance statistics, which is called the MBD, and it's technically Dirichlet model, even though it's often pronounced as Dirichlet. because he was a German statistician who lived in France. So there is debate of whether it's Dirichlet or Dirichlet, but we usually say NBD Dirichlet because it is. But it's a small part of that actually provides estimates for penetration and frequency. But what it basically does is maps how brands grow, because if you have that your loyalty is set by your penetration and your market share, so if these metrics are all linked together, then that means if you know what market share you want to go, you know what your penetration and your loyalty will look like. Mm-hmm. So you know exactly how many more customers you have to get in a time period and how the buying will change. So it basically maps you a path to growth. Now, it doesn't tell you how to do it, but it does tell you what success looks like. And that's sometimes half the battle in marketing. A lot of times in marketing, we assume that success can take many different forms, but actually the empirical analysis paints a much more clearer picture that, there is what success looks like in terms of what you will look like if you grow.
And you basically boil it down to, or Byron in his first book already boils it down to, that it's all about mental availability and physical availability. So easy to mind and easy to find. So that's a very nice way of structuring thoughts. So okay, our action does that really create the right mental availability, or does it increase the mental availability? And you introduce the term category entry points there, because mental availability, what does it mean? Like when should it be mentally available? And would you like to explore on those category entry points?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, just explaining that mental availability is essentially the long-term probability that the brand will come to mind in buying situations, knowing that for each person in every category buying situation, contexts change. If you think about any category that you buy, how you buy, the environment, both internally and externally, varies a lot. And so there's no guarantee that a brand will definitely be retrieved in any buying situation. It's always a probability. And that's what we've learned from memory models that understand how we retrieve things from memory. And when you merge that in with what we know about how people buy, you see that we're constantly battling the fact that our memories are all over the place, and there are some things that affect the probability of retrieval. So category entry points are one of those things that affects the probability of retrieval. So that's why we talk about them underpinning this idea of mental availability, because category entry points are basically that transition point when you go from being Olaf to being Olaf the category buyer. And you will do that throughout the day for various categories. You might do that for buying a coffee, for buying lunch, for getting a present for somebody, for buying a toy for your dog, buying food for your dog. All of these things, you will transition from being a person to being a category buyer and therefore a potential brand buyer.
And that is interesting, because there has been so much effort in putting in creating precise personas, like really like the persona, the buyer. But what you're saying now is that me as a person, Olaf, I'm changing. Like I'm in each moment of need, I change basically in a different person. So one time I could be a luxury buyer in one category, and then a very price sensitive buyer in the other category. And it all depends on the context of how I think about the category.
You could actually be a luxury buyer and a price sensitive buyer in the same category. So you could decide, I really want a treat. I'm going to, go and buy these very expensive truffles at a specialist chocolate store. And then later in the day, you could just go and buy, a relatively cheaper little bar of Milka for some other reason. So, we actually don't even have the same personas within a category. And that's where a lot of the times we've missed. Every time we come into a category, there can be different external and internal contextual factors that influence what our brain or our memory decides are going to be suitable at that time.
Right. But that's the question, how do you define the category? For example, I wouldn't put Milka with the truffles in the same category, because the one is like high-end confectionery that I might buy because I have guests that evening, and the Milka I might buy at the train station because I want to have something for myself while traveling, and I like chocolate. Yeah. So that's a basically focus question. What is the category? How do you go about that? Like.
Yeah, that's a bit of a how long's a piece of string type of question. But if you think about the category as broadly what you're selling. So if I said to you, avocado, what would you think of?
What category it is? Avocado is food and it's vegetables. Is it a vegetable? Yeah, I think it's a vegetable.
I think it's technically
a fruit, huh? Yeah, it's a fruit. That's right. It's one of those strange things like strawberries are nuts biologically, yeah? Something like that.
But do you know it's also a brand of mattress?
No, I didn't know that. Avocado is a brand of mattress. Now I know.
So that's what I mean by a category. It's like a basic definition of what you're selling. So your high-end chocolate place still has to put in that it's actually a chocolate. So I'll give you another brand, Russell Stover. Have you ever heard of that?
No, sorry, I haven't.
Well, that is a chocolate brand.
Russell Stover.
It's a US chocolate brand. So if you didn't know it was a chocolate brand, then it has no chance of, it's not in the chocolate part of your
come
brand.
up. Like for me, it's Rittersport. In Germany, Rittersport. Yeah, the square chocolates. Yeah, that's coming up.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by a category versus what you're talking about when you're talking about something special, something quick, those sorts of things. They're more in the category entry point.
Okay, right. Mm-hmm.
They are the contextual factors that go, I don't want any chocolate, and I don't just want my brain to give me a list of all the possible chocolates in the world. I just want something quick and cheap right now. And so your brain goes, well, there's this, and this. Or it might go this and this and sort of stuff. And it will give you options that are more suitable. It won't give you the high-end specialist chocolate because it goes, yeah, that's not the door you've entered your brain into.
So basically, it's the category entry points are the goals, the possible goals I have by employing the category. So the category is my tool to achieve something, and either I want to entertain.
Why do you want to part money with the category? What's behind that? And those things. And so I talk about the framework of the W's because those category entry points can come from internal things like your motivations, the why, or your emotions, the how you want to feel before, during, or after. It can come from the environment. It can come from where you are. It can come from what you're doing at that time. It can come from what you've got with. So the drink you have might determine what sort of sweet treat you're looking for at the time. And also it can come from other people. So if you can be buying for other people, or you might, say you've got a child with you, the chocolate that you might buy might be quite different from if you're by yourself. Yep. So all of those factors influence the sorts of brands, because our brain just doesn't go, well, okay, you want chocolate, I'm just going to reel off all the chocolates until we get to one. Our brain's lazy. It just goes, no, you don't need all that stuff. Here's a few. Go work it out of these ones. And that's what category entry points do. They enable the brain to try to be helpful and give us a few that are linked to what it is, the doorway we were entering into the category with.
And what you're saying is that big brands own more category entry points or are available in more category entry points than their competitors, basically. They don't own it, but they're available. Nobody owns category entry points. They just come up in the decision-making moment. So it's not about owning category entry points. It's about coming up in the decision moment, and then and one of the things that you say in your book is like, don't shoot yourself with target marketing. And that is a bold statement, looking at the domination of performance marketing in the last years, both in B2C and B2B discussion and budget shift. How would you like to explore that? The thinking that we just discussed comes up is like that. It's not about focusing your marketing on a really selected target group, but it's more about mass marketing, be available in like with many light buyers, and not focus on certain heavy users of the category, because the growth of the brands come from the light users of the category. So how does that, is that connected with don't shoot yourself with target marketing, because the target marketing would be always the heavy users probably?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, sometimes people set out targets. They'll be, we're going after Jane, who has 2 kids, and she lives in the suburbs, and she walks with her friends on weekends and likes horror movies. Sometimes this is quite common for brands to build up this sort of persona of what their target buyer is about. The problem with target marketing is it's actually never worked. But we never let a story get in the way of evidence. And so what we'd suggest to people is to think of it in reverse. Okay, imagine you've got a whole sea of fish out there.
Mm-hmm.
So ask yourself, out of all of those potential customers, who, if they came knocking on your door and said, I want to buy your brand, you would go, no, it's not for you. Okay, so that's the thing to ask yourself. And now in some markets, that is actually, there are real people. So for example, if you're in the credit card industry, there are some people who have poor credit, and you would go, yeah, no. If someone's like defaulted on the last 3 loans, we do not want to give them a credit card. So there is some cases where, or you might go, oh, they live in an area, we don't distribute to that area, we don't service that area. So no, we don't want those people. So there will be occasions where you do want to cut people out, mainly because you either can't meet their needs, or they're too risky a customer to take on board. But once you've got rid of those, the question is to ask yourself is, why would you exclude anybody else?
Mm-hmm. But isn't like that goes against like common like intuitive knowledge, because you always need to target, because your budget is not unlimited. Like you always have to start somewhere, and that is in a way a targeting, because you have to decide. Like I start with an area, like I focus my budget on a certain area, and that's targeting the area. Or do I misunderstand something there?
Possibly, but that's more. So there's a difference between going. So I'm going to buy like the 18 to 35-year-old market, and that's the people I'm buying, in terms of I want to find where those people are and get as many of those as possible, versus going, well, I've got X amount of money, get me as many of these people who buy whatever the category is as possible. So so you don't now, that by virtue of it will mean some people you won't reach. Even the biggest brands can't reach everybody, but it's about the need to limit it in versus just go, well, if they're a category buyer, I want to reach them. So how can I maximize that as much as possible?
And what common knowledge is then, but we need to target those that are in immediate need of something, like that will buy tomorrow, and that we maximize with that. And I had a very fascinating talk with Paul Feldwick, who wrote The Anatomy of Humbug and Why the Peddler Sings, and he had a very good example of himself, like that he saw one of his first ads that impressed him was this boy standing in front of a Jaguar showcase, and the headline said, "One day, ... And he saw that advertising when he was like 14 years old, but it planted basically the like when he finally earned enough money and he was thinking about treating himself to an amazing car, Jaguar popped up. And that is something like, basically in the beginning you would have said this was a waste to reach him when he was 14. With your perspective, it's like creating mental availability or memory structures that when the category entry point comes, I have arrived at a certain point in my career and I look for a representative, impressive car. Suddenly, this impulse that I gave there to somebody that was not in the market in that moment flourishes. So in that view, basically wasting money on people that are not in direct need of my product is brand investment. And that's a new way of thinking. about media spend?
Well, I mean, this is a colleague of mine talks about the 95-5 rule. And that's the idea that vast majority of people are not actually in the market for your brand, this particularly in B2B categories right now. They're not in the market for your category. But does that mean you totally ignore them? No, you build up mental structures so that when they do come in, as your example said, they've got a better chance of thinking of you. Now, aiming for 14 for a Porsche buyer, that's playing the long game. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. And I do think marketing to children is technically illegal in a lot of countries. So again,
well, it wasn't in a comic book, huh? Like there was just an advertisement that he happened to see when he was 14.
Just as a strategy, having, we're going after the under 16s so that in 50 odd years time, when they've got enough money, they'll that's
the long game. Yeah,
it's a little extreme. Did he actually buy a Porsche?
No, not a Porsche, Jaguar.
So in the end, he did.
He did. Okay, yeah. Well, there you go.
So it did work. And I have another example. I mean, it is illegal to go after children, but my son, like we visited this amusement park in Germany, and it was the Ravensburger Land, which is those puzzle manufacturers, German puzzle manufacturers, and they had a sponsored driving school for kids, and it was sponsored by Mini. So my son was getting his toy driver's license in a Mini, and guess what happened 5 years later when my wife was thinking about a car, what we bought in the end, and I don't know, that's the only impulse that created that, but it definitely was a strong emotional moment. Like we spent almost 45 minutes until he got his license, and Mini was all around. So it was very, very strong memory structure that was created there.
I know, but the thing is, we could trade these really lovely stories forever, but reality is it's actually not normal. There's tons of things your son's seen that won't impact him. And, we've got two examples from a very specific market here. I'm not sure he's seen any insurance brands that are going to change his life later.
No, we were talking about my wife now. She was influenced by this. Yeah, my wife was influenced by seeing our son getting his license in a Mini and so on. So that created very fresh memory structures for her.
Yeah. So, I mean, a colleague of mine actually did some work looking at brands over people's lives and how they did. And it actually, she found that they had people, when they were children, were exposed to brands. When they left home, so these are more household brands, things like breakfast cereal, that sort of stuff. When they left home, they deliberately rebelled against them in some cases, but then they came back to them when they had their own children. So, there's just that cycle. So, yeah, I mean, exposure to brands as a child, in any part of our lives can have an effect. But when we talk about mental availability, we're more talking about the reality is that for most purchases on most days, we're not thinking about them until we're in the category. And our job as marketers is to up the odds before people get into the category. So that's what we're doing with most purchases every day. And, the vast majority of purchases are not very interesting stories. They're, I've run out of toilet paper, I better get some more. I've got some friends coming over, I need to get some wine. I've got to make a dessert tonight, or I've got to take a present to a party, or I'm hungry, need something to eat.
Right.
They're not that exciting.
I totally agree. And before we to improve the chance that people then will buy your brand, distinctive brand assets have a very important role. But before I would like to talk at length about that, because it's your special expertise. I'd like to do a little bit a detour on feeling, because emotion has been emotion in brand building. We need to have more emotional advertising, and then there was this term love brand that had like this with Kevin Roberts, I think, wrote the book. Was that right? And could you explore a little bit on your view on emotion and feeling and the connection with brands?
Emotions in communicate. So whenever we have an emotion to reaction to something, emotional reaction to something, we process it that little bit more deeply than when we don't. So if I say something and it makes you laugh, you'll just remember that moment a little bit more than any other moment during our discussion. Same with advertising. So when you have advertising that generates emotion, it can be remembered a little bit more. That doesn't guarantee it'll be remembered for the right reasons. So sometimes it's remembered because of the joke, and if the joke wasn't related to the brand, then the brand gets lost. But we remember that experience a bit more. So we like an emotion in communications, like, putting a turbo engine on a car. Get you where you want to go a little bit quicker than you would if it wasn't there. That doesn't necessarily translate, or it doesn't need to translate to any affection for the brand. If you look at most normal distributions of how people feel about brands, what you find is there's a few people that really like it, a few people that really hate it, and the vast majority people think it's okay to buy occasionally.
So no risk in deciding, and basically it's available, it's there, it's easy to find.
And they're mildly positive towards it because they know it will do what it needs to do. So if you look at buyers of brands, they skew a bit more positive. If you look at non-buyers of brands, they skew around neutral. But very few people actively dislike brands. Very few people really, really love them because we've got better things to spend our emotions on. So we don't see any evidence that people need to love a brand to buy it. And so that frees a lot of marketers up from doing that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it hurts the egos, because it's like when you say I'm creating love for something, or I'm just making something mentally available when people need it, the creation of love obviously has a higher, importance. And I think that the love brand was really servicing also the ego goals of marketeers, because they felt, we are really important in people's life. And what you're saying is that our importance is overvalued. It's like brands is something so unimportant in our life. It just needs to be there and needs to be easy when need arises.
I hesitate to say it, but if your reason for existence is building love through a brand, maybe you need a bit of start sharing some kindness and love with them first, because it's much easier to share that sort of emotion with a person than it is via a brand to some anonymous strangers who have their own people to care.
Totally agree. I don't even talk enough to my friends, so why would I be interested in talking to brands?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, everybody, if you talk to everybody, and they'll bring up some brand that they go, I really love this sort of stuff. But the thing is, again, it goes back to, but what's typical? What's normal? Think of all the brands you buy. How many your air freshener that you've bought?
Oh, I have a very deep relationship with my air freshener. It's a very important part of my life. Totally. Yeah, it has changed my life, basically. Okay, so we thank you very much for exploring that aspect. And now for the final part of our podcast, we come to the juicy part of differentiating for people that have English as a second language. First of all, the difference between distinct and different. And there were books out that were focusing on brands. You need to be different. Differentiate or die was one title that was written in that direction. So could you please, first of all, make that distinction, the distinction between distinct and different? And then why is it so important to be distinct, but not so important to be different?
Okay, so differentiation comes from economics. So it's that idea that you have to offer something that customers value, that therefore will lead them to give you disproportionate loyalty. So if you offer something like some sort of feature, some sort of benefit that either is dramatically better or that others don't have, then you will lock customers in. So if a competitor does something, they're less likely to leave you. You basically get to hold on to your customers for longer. It's cheaper to hold on to them because they're locked into whatever it is you're offering. And so that's the basic economic proposition of differentiation. Now, when it got introduced into marketing, and I'm not sure who, Theodore Levitt back in the 70s is one of the first sort of published authors that I know about. It may have been before him, but it was based on this idea that it doesn't necessarily have to be a real difference. It can be a perceived difference. So it can be symbolic rather than actual. Because when in economic terms, it's things like you're a car, you offer all-wheel drive, no other cars offer all-wheel drive. So anyone who wants all-wheel drive will come to you because they can't get it from anywhere else. So you might have a patent on it, you have some sort of intellectual property protection of it, but you can own that. And so you own the people that want that. But then in marketing, it got shifted to perceptual difference, that it can be, as long as they feel like it's exclusive, then you will get that same benefits. People will flock to you, they will be locked in as customers, you will get disproportionate loyalty, it will cost you less to keep them, you can charge higher prices for it, you can really lock them in and sort of squeeze them. And this is why it's linked to this idea of targeting, because you have to then find, so if it's take our all-wheel drive example, you have to find the people who want all-wheel drive, because not everybody will want it. So you find those people, you let them know you've got all-wheel drive. They go, wow, that's what I've been looking for all my life. They then rush by you and they're with you forever and ever, and everyone lives happily ever after. The reality is that doesn't happen for a whole heap of reasons. First of all, very little that brands offer is not quickly copied. So the idea of having something that is a meaningful difference that you can own and competitors can't quickly copy. Even things that are not successful are often copied by competitors before anyone knows that they were not successful. So that becomes a problem. If you're in things like pharmaceuticals where you have patents, that sort of thing, you have a bit more protection there, but most people are not in that market. Most people's innovation is a different flavor. What is it? Yuzu is apparently a big flavor this season, the Japanese citrus. So we'll see yuzu everywhere. So someone will introduce it, and assuming it gets some sales, other brands in the category will copy. So it's not ever kept. And if you keep waiting for that to be successful, what happens is it leads brands to focus on things that they can say that no one else can. So, for example, I was in the London Underground one time and I saw a big ad for toothpaste that then said, now with oxygen. And I just sort of looked and went, huh? What? Why? I get oxygen from the air. I don't think I need it from my toothpaste as well. I have no idea what oxygen and
Is it a category entry point to look for toothpaste with oxygen? I want to breathe while brushing my teeth.
Yeah, there's probably some reason for it. But again, it's an example. I've never seen that on any toothpaste ad. So it's a very unique, differentiated message. They're probably the only toothpaste with oxygen. But what it is that search for that USP, that point of differentiation, can lead people down a path of irrelevance. Because, maybe if you're like crazy about your teeth, you understand what oxygen does to your teeth. Maybe it makes it wider, maybe it freshens your breath. I don't know. I just brush my teeth. That's it. So that's the problem with differentiation. And that's not to say when you have innovation that is genuine breakthrough that then takes the category further because of things, fantastic. You should capitalize on that. It's important to remember that differentiation and distinctiveness are not opposites. They're just different to each other. So if you develop a new packaging capability that allows it to be, say, you can drink it while driving and not spill anything, say something like that. Obviously, and you've got the technology to do that, great. Tell people about it, do it. but just be realistic about how long that game will last.
Yeah, I try to translate this now, like in my language, like what we talked about before. So first of all, the category entry points. You are not the ones who decides what is a category entry point. So the category entry point of oxygen in toothpaste probably doesn't even exist. So you're super different in that, but the category entry point is not there. So the first question would be, what are the most important category entry points for my category, which most people, that is the reason why they look actually for some kind of tool to solve a problem, and then try to be mentally available in as many of these category entry points as possible. Yeah, and then comes the distinctiveness that helps us do that.
Actually, no, then comes the portfolio that you offer, because you have to have things that match the category entry points that you're communicating.
Right.
So there's no point in saying, get us for a special occasion if you don't have a premium looking product.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously you need to deliver. You need to deliver the value that is relevant in the category entry point. That's okay.
Something viable.
Right, buyable in the. Okay, that was something that I didn't mention, but that's the entrance ticket for the game. But it doesn't win the game. It's like winning the game is like being mentally available then in the moment, in the decision making moment, and that has a lot to do with being distinct. Yeah, it's like being recognizable, being easy to find. Isn't that basically the function of distinctiveness?
Yeah, so probably might be useful to talk about. So you have mental and physical availability, right? And within each of those, there are 3 different dimensions. So the first is all about scale. So in mental availability terms, we talk about reach in your communications, reaching out to as many brains as possible. And in physical availability, we talk about being as widely distributed as possible, so that you're in as many places where buyers will buy, so that when they go to buy, you're there. The second component of that is branding. So this is where distinctive assets come in. So in mental availability, distinctive assets help whatever you put out in your communications be put in the right part of people's brains, that it's well branded. So they know it's unmistakably from this brand. They don't even have to think about it. It's just an easy processing that the brand is an integral part of the communications. So in that case, distinctive assets expand that branding footprint such that the brand can be evoked even when it's not present or not noticed.
So it makes it more brain friendly, basically, easier to process. Like
work that you're not, because buyers when they're watching ads don't play guess the brand. Okay. If you don't put the brand in there, nothing gets processed, and I've seen that in the data. So then on the physical availability side, when people go to buy, they're often in environments where there's lots of clutter, and that can be competitive clutter, environmental clutter, and also mental clutter of the time, because even when people are in buying situations, their brain's not really just on buying. And so distinctive assets, particularly ones that we call shopping distinctive assets, help the brand stand out in those environments so that it's easy to find there.
And what does it mean for service? Does it apply for all categories? Because that was the question you answered in the second book, basically, because people said, yeah, but this is only for fast-moving consumer goods, for decision moments at the point of sale in a supermarket. And you answered that question. No, it's also relevant, for example, for service industries. Let's take financial industries. Could you explain, like, how do you become distinct as a financial brand?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have R&D in this right now that we'll be sharing probably next year now, by the time we get it finished, that really does drill down to this in more details. But, services still need to be found in online marketplace. So if you think about financial services, they have ATMs that need to be found. You have in your wallet probably multiple credit cards from multiple banks. Every time you go to pay for something, you choose a credit card. And so that's a tangible item that's related to your bank. Now, the curious thing is, if you look at a lot of credit cards, they don't resemble the distinctive assets of their brands at all. I used to laugh because I had a bank. My main bank was blue and red in color, and it gave me a black and red, a credit card and a debit card. One was black, one was red. I then had a credit card from a bank that was black and red in color, and that credit card was purple.
And that's a very strong touch point, because if you think about how often you look at that credit card, how often you touch the credit card, so creating it's a good place to start building a distinctive asset if you have a credit card that is recognizably different, and like American Express has achieved with the black American Express because of the material, because it's made of metal. So once you touch that black American Express, it is it's very distinct. It's like, I don't know any other.
Oh, except for Olaf, who uses a card anymore?
That's
Don't you
right.
have it all on your phone?
Yeah.
So, but still, you have the visual image of your card on the phone.
Mhm.
So that's where it comes in. So even services can find areas where they can tangibilize their brand and in a visual or audio form, and communications, different touch points are doing that. And the importance of doing that is because you're operating in competitive environments. Often you'll see multiple bank branches together, multiple ATMs next to each other, multiple credit cards, multiple apps on your phone.
Yeah, but you just mentioned a very interesting point that I would like just to return to real quick, because who touches credit cards anymore? It's all on Apple Pay or whatever. But that brings us to an interesting point, because distinctive assets, they're all sensory in all respect, like they can be touched, they can be smelled, they can be sound. But once you established it, you can trigger it through other senses. For example, once you made the physical experience of the heavy black American Express credit card, then just seeing it can activate again the memory structure of the physical touch. Is like the Coca-Cola bottle. Like once you touch that cold, rippled Coca-Cola bottle, like the glass bottle, just seeing it will make you memorize also that distinctive asset of Coca-Cola. Isn't that the reason why Coca-Cola uses the shape of the Coke bottle also on the cans? To refresh the memory of the shape, and they've become,
I'm not so sure about that, because memories decay pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So things that sensory memories like smell and touch and things, yes, they can be powerful in the moment, but they dissipate very, very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So the chance of you remembering that, it's a possibility. The reason why Coca-Cola would put the silhouette of the bottle on the can is because the silhouette of the bottle is one of their strongest distinctive assets visually. It doesn't actually have to evoke any other senses. Our eyes are very powerful. Our ears can be powerful, but they're also can be easily distracted as well. So, so audio assets are really useful. The other sorts of distinctive assets, they're limited because you need to be in the physical location. You need to be co-located with the brand in order to experience them.
Mm-hmm.
The memories of them, I wouldn't bank on that. Mm-hmm. I would always go for the eyes and the ears first of all, until we are in the metaverse and we can taste and touch things there. Mm-hmm. Then I would worry about the other things after that. But if you're in an environment whereby you can leverage off scent, taste, smell, the problem with taste is also that you have to experience it to know what it tastes like. And so therefore it's not really helpful to get new buyers in to notice, because they don't have that experience.
Wouldn't the value of those other sensory touch points also be to create like a positive emotion in the moment of contact and connect it with the brand? And then the memory retrieval would be more like, I feel good about this brand, I don't know why, so I will look for reasons that this makes sense. But let's not go in the hypothesis, because your scientific rigor is your is your field.
I think you'd have to weave a pretty big story for that. And I'm a big fan of simple first, only getting complicated when you have to.
Totally agreed. I would like to finish this podcast, like not now, but with the last part of the podcast, with a wonderful metaphor you created in your second book, creating distinctive brand assets, which was the deadly sins of branding. Yeah, the 7 costly sins of branding, of brand identity. So the classic, sins are pride, gluttony, greed, sloth, lust, wrath, envy. And you made a very good point in basically like introducing the in the beginning of the book. You basically say, so okay, this is the sin, and I will teach you how to avoid the sin. Would you like to we probably don't have time to cover all, but would you like to pick out some of them? And because this was very rich also in the way you told the story. So what is pride, for example, or gluttony or greed in brand identity?
Well, pride is probably my favorite, because I think this is the thing, this assumption that distinctive assets are all powerful and blamed for everything. And I think that's one of the key things. The reason I like it is because I've seen so many distinctive assets abandoned for reasons that were not their fault. You know, the company just wants to, because they're visible signals to the world, often they are changed to signal change within the company. So, you know, if you've had a couple of bad quarters, you might go, well, we need to, you know, revamp something, and your distinctive assets is often where people go. And the problem is with that is that you might just be making a bad situation worse, because maybe your distinctive assets were the one thing, they most likely were not what are causing your downturn. And you might be ruining the one thing that is working for you. So, you know, so that's what I think is just one of the most important ones, because I see it happen so much. You know, there's a lovely metaphorical graveyard somewhere of abandoned distinctive assets that, for no good reason of their own, just...
And they stay alive for such a long time. I know what you said is like the natural state of memory is decay, but there are some distinctive assets which was stopped using 15 years ago, and in market research they still turn up. Yeah, everybody still. It's like slogans like "It's not a trick, it's a Sony" in our generation. "It's not a trick, it's a Sony" was an amazing slogan. I don't remember any other slogans after that for Sony, yeah, and certain colors or characters that were used in TV commercials, and then people will still remember them like 15, 20 years later, and
they will recognize them. There's a big difference between our recall memory.
They will recognize them, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the thing. So yes, you can recognize things, and that's why it's easier to reactivate mental structures than to build new ones. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I always advise companies that have been around, brands that have been around a long time, when they're looking at, you know, what can they do with their distinctive assets? I go, mine your past. Have a look and see what you've used in the past, because there might have been some perfectly good assets that were abandoned for no particular reason whatsoever that you could reinvigorate and actually give you. They won't necessarily be immediately strong, but they might be a head start ahead of starting from scratch and starting at zero.
And I recently read something. I think I think it was one of your. You published it, or you published it together. It was about the which distinctive assets are like how powerful are they? And one of them was like characters that are completely out of fashion at the moment. They turn out to be a super powerful distinctive asset. Once you build a character like Tony the Tiger for Esso, which hasn't been used for eternity, was a very powerful way of activating the brand. And there was the question of which TV spots. I think Ipsos did that. In which TV spots are which distinctive assets used, and how successful were the TV spots?
Yeah, so there is one misconception I'd really love to clear up, and that is this idea that there are better and worse distinctive asset types. Mm-hmm. I've been measuring distinctive assets for almost a decade now. That all types of distinctive assets can be strong in terms of scoring, in my terms, close to 100% fame, 100% uniqueness. Okay, so when people talk about, you know, characters are really strong assets. So we've found, for example, characters score high on uniqueness. And the reason for that is they have unique characteristics, whereas things like taglines and colors have more general characteristics. So it's harder for them to score high on uniqueness. A lot of colours are very competitive because often categories draw from a limited colour palette and don't think about unusual combinations or colour plus design elements that can actually separate out their particular colour-based assets. So they kind of underutilise the creative potential of the asset type. Whereas when people do characters, they're often very different in how they look. And so it's easier for them to be, if you know them, you know what brand they are, you don't get a lot of confusion.
So they're not better in the sense, but it's easier to establish them in that way. It's easier to be unique. So the ultimate thing is something that is super well known and it's uniquely attributed to your brand. And that is easier to be done with a category where there's less competition because everybody competes for colors. And in certain categories like consulting, blue, yeah, everybody's blue, yeah, because somehow blue feels natural, feels right. But you argue against looking for too much meaning also in these distinctive assets, like to confuse what the asset actually activates as a meaning compared to how distinct is it and unique for the brand.
Yeah. Now, so to go back to our original discussion, we were talking about differentiation versus distinctiveness. So I talk about distinctive assets as meaning-free assets where the core meaning that you want to establish for that asset is the brand name. Okay, so that's what you want. And so if you choose something that has a meaning already that is not the brand name, that makes it harder to connect the brand name to it because you have mental competition. Because when people see that shape, color, they've got something else that pops into their brain.
Could you give an example?
Say, for example, say you associate the color purple with royalty. Mm-hmm. Right? Say you have that in your brain. That means if I put color purple on my brand, you will think royalty. And I have to work against royalty, which is an established mental structure in your brain. And I have to put my brand in there as well. Because I want, when you see that purple, you to think of my brand, not to think about royalty, which might then lead you to think about royal families and royal weddings and all sorts of different things. You know, you just go on a different mental path and it's away from my brand. Celebrities have this problem as assets.
One question there, though, if royalty, to pick that example, if royalty fits well to my proposition as a brand, though, like an upmarket, sophisticated, whatever kind of product, and royalty serves that well, then in the short run, obviously, this is an advantage. Like if it activates royalty and the connected associations serve to make my proposition more believable. The only problem arises when I want to reposition the brand, maybe 10 years, 20 years down the road.
Or add to it. You might want to keep that, but you might want to extend it to other categories. Okay. So when you have meaning, you make it harder to establish and you essentially potentially put an expiry date on it because it's only relevant when that meaning is relevant. So you limit its use. So sometimes people have assets so they might be a multi-product brand and they'll have an asset that's linked to a particular subcategory. So that means that asset can only be used in that subcategory. It can't be used in other subcategories. And so it limits the value that can be extracted from it. So, so you can do that. But I've just found that when you try to make an asset do double time, i.e. meaning and branding or messaging and branding, tends to do neither particularly well.
Yeah, so you shouldn't mix the identity with the messaging. Like make sure you talk about a palette, like a distinctive asset palette to use to activate the brand and then connect the message, depending on the campaign that you're running, the positioning of the brand, but make sure that is not the same thing. The one activates the brand and the other one delivers the message which is in your current positioning relevant.
Yeah, well, I separate them out into three things. I talk about branding devices, where the primary purpose is to trigger the brand, messaging devices, which the primary purpose is to build associations, and creative devices, which the primary purpose is to grab attention. And so, so if you work out what it's supposed to do, and depending on what it is, which of those roles it's doing, that impacts how you evaluate success, whether or not it needs to be consistent or you can change it. All of those sorts of things come into play. So you really do need to know what role you want it to play. If you try and merge the roles together, then you have very blurry success metrics and also execution metrics over time.
Right.
Because something that's a messaging device can change according to what message you want to do. So if you change the message, you don't have to use it anymore. But if it's a branding device, you need to keep it consistent because you've got to keep that going in people's brains. So if you have something that's trying to do both, what do you do when you change the message? Well, it means you can't use the distinctive asset, or the distinctive asset might just be a bit weird that it's sitting there and it evokes something that's unrelated to the message that you want to play.
Right.
So we talk. So distinctive assets are better. The best meaning for a distinctive asset is the brand name.
So that's very helpful. That's very a clear orientation for how to deal with distinctive brand assets. So I have two more questions on that topic. The one thing is measurement. How do you actually measure the strength and the value of a distinctive asset? And then you finish your book with the 4 commandments of building distinctive brand assets. So the measurement first, please.
Measurement first. Yeah, well, measurement. Well, this is where it all started, actually, because because one of the things that came out of mental availability and what you need to do to build it is, of course, you have to have good branding. And so, I'd say, yes, so good branding is important. I'd be in a room full of marketers and everyone would nod and agree. And I'd go, well, that was easy. And then they would send me their good branded ad. And I'd be like, I think we might have a different meaning of what good branding actually constitutes. And so that evolved into working with executing the brand name and then these other branding elements of distinctive assets, because we realized there were no metrics or measures for this. So people were just going on opinion, gut feel. And so this is where it's coming in. So I developed 2 metrics, fame and uniqueness. So uniqueness is about, do you own the asset? So whereas fame is about how widespread is that ownership. And you want both to be as close to 100% as possible.
And you measured implicitly? You measured explicit or implicit?
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of, well, if you talk about implicit measurement in terms of time to respond, et cetera, not a fan of that. It's not fit for purpose. It's not what distinctive assets are meant to do. It's when they trigger the brand, it's not about, is it in 1.2 or 0.8 of a second? It's whether it's retrieved or not. That's the key thing from memory. We did R&D. It's actually published in the Journal of Advertising Research, where we looked at 4 different possible approaches to measurement, different cues, whether you prompt or unprompt, and asset cued with the brand unprompted is the best approach to measuring it. It's a hard one. It's a hard measure, but we're dealing with things that are replacements for the most valuable thing you have, your brand name. So you don't want a soft measure that will inflate scores. And if you give people brand names, you get, in the paper, we quantified it at about 20 percentage points in inflation. That is people attributing it to the asset that don't really have that in their brains. So we advocate a hard measure, which is unprompted. But when you're dealing with multiple unprompted measures, then you have to put a whole heap of safeguards in to avoid inhibition and priming effects. So there's a whole process that goes into measure development to do that. But I will say the most important thing to remember is, apart from measuring it right, the metrics you get now is only one part of the big picture of where you want to go with it. Because in deciding on what assets to invest in, your benchmark metrics are part of the discussion, But there's a whole heap of other things that are important. For example, the flexibility of the asset. So the best performing asset might actually be something that is actually restricted in its ability to be used.
Like an example, for example?
For example, if a brand hasn't really done a lot with distinctive assets, sometimes a font, like a logo font, can be the best performing asset. It can have relatively low fame, but really good uniqueness.
And it can be used widely. It can be used online and print and... Yeah.
Well, no, but that's the thing. Fonts can only be used visually and only used with words. So they're actually very limited in their use. Okay. So if you compare that to the other type of word-based asset of tagline, a tagline is very flexible. It can be written, it can be spoken.
Yeah, font can be spoken. I'm speaking Times Roman now. I hope you hear that.
Yeah, but you can't even use it just in a visual scene, whereas you can actually show a tagline actually being done in some cases as well. Right. So, so taglines can replace audio assets when you don't have an audio asset because it can be spoken out loud. So that has inordinate flexibility. So just because the font's the best performing asset doesn't mean it's the best to invest in going forward.
I have a juicy example for that. I recently watched Stranger Things, the Netflix series, and actually the finger licking good was used in there as a line, and that shows the flexibility of a tagline which is learned, finger licking good, and everybody thought of Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, but KFC is also a very good example of why you need a palette of distinctive assets, not just one. Because we had did you know that there was this thing called COVID that had hit the world, and suddenly.
No, what was COVID? Never heard of it. What does it stand for?
But suddenly people licking their fingers is not something you want to put out in your advertising. Right. So, and they were they made fun of it. They went, well, we're just blanking this out. But they could do it because they have such strong other assets that they can draw on. They don't just have a strong tagline. They've got other assets to come in. So
that's a good point. Yeah. So again, context sensitive, like the distinctive assets can be very context sensitive. As in COVID, obviously that one lost a lot of its value, but it will regain the value later on when maybe, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, they probably got it back now, but you never know. So for another example, more recently, a topical one, but the meerkat from Compare the Market, which is a Russian thing. And they're like, oh, better hold that back for a little while. Not a great thing with Russia right now. Right. So this is where you never know what's going to happen that's going to make any one of your assets something you might need to retire even just temporarily.
Yeah. Can I explain that to my German listeners? The meerkat is a comparison platform like Check24 in Germany, and it used this Russian aristocrat, the meerkat, like an animal that was speaking with a Russian accent, and it was highly distinct and was very memorable and very funny also. And it was just invented because Compare the Market spoken with an accent sounded like meerkat. But obviously now with the Ukrainian crisis, that meaning is a little problematic at this moment. That's great. Jenni, time is flying by. I could speak for another 2-3 hours, and what my listeners definitely, I think, will have understood at this point, worth buying the books, because very deep topic, lots of things to think about, and you've done this in an extremely clear way, and also give very, very good pointers and models to think about this. Would you like to finish with the 4 commandments for building distinctive brand assets in a telegram form?
Now I have to remember what they are. Now you're testing my memory. It's a while since I actually looked at those.
Let's phrase it a little easier. Let's just say if you give three advice to people building distinctive brands, they understood the value of it. They understood that their media works harder when they own them. They need to be flexible. So the 3 top things that they should keep in mind.
Well, the first thing to do is to remember that you choose wisely, first of all. Don't make the job any harder than you need to, because it's hard to build distinctive assets. It takes a long-term commitment. It takes deliberate execution. link. So don't choose something that, that is already linked to a competitor or has some meaning that's just going to make it more difficult in the long term. So that's the first thing to do, is don't make your job any harder than it needs to be. The second thing to do is that, it is about execution. So once you decide to build a distinctive asset, it is about you need co-presentation. The brand name is your friend with distinctive assets. One of the biggest mistakes marketers make is they assume that they confuse using a distinctive asset with building a distinctive asset. When you build a distinctive asset, what causes those links in memory is you have the brand name and the asset co-located temporally. So that's been visually at the same time, audio at the same time, or adjacent, or visual and audio. So you see it and you hear it. Here, you see the asset, hear the brand name, or vice versa. But that's what forms associations. So you need the brand name when you're building the asset. When you're using an asset, that's after you've built it, and then that's when you don't need the brand name. But if you put that in too quickly, what happens is you're just wasting exposures, because people will see the asset, but they don't form the link with the brand. So do think about your execution. And the third thing I'll leave it to is, once you have a strong asset, protect it, because it's very easy for people to get bored with things that you experience every day. And again, going back to those 7 sins, some of them are about things that get changed for no reason. So consider yourself the custodian of this asset. And remember that if people are tired of your asset, then you've got a creative challenge rather than a distinctive asset challenge. So that's where you go to your creative and creators and say, hey, we've got this color, we've got this character, we've got this tagline. Can you find something fresh to do with it? So you don't change the asset, you just change how you use it. And I mean, I feel like I've been doing a giant ad for KFC here, but if you look at how KFC have reinvented the kernel, I think it's a really good example of taking what could be quite viewed as an old, staid asset and turning it into something new and fresh. And so I would encourage people to Google that. If you feel like your asset's old-fashioned, out of date, not...
And they see him in wrestling matches and in many other new contexts, which they haven't seen.
There are some you can't unsee, but there are some that are actually very good. Yeah, there's a few where you just scratch your head and go, not so sure about that. But again, it's about saying that if you do have a distinctive asset that you feel is being, it's just old and tired, then see it as a creative challenge. Don't throw it out and try to replace it.
The bigger challenge is to build it, that people know it. The fame is the difficult and expensive part, and then just to refresh it is better than trying to build a new one. That's fantastic advice, Jenni. That's very useful. I have one last question for you. If you would have the chance to put a screensaver worldwide on all the people responsible for brands, and this screensaver can say something, an inspirational quote, something that you want them to know, or whatever. Paul Feldwick put a TV commercial on there. But what would you put on that screensaver that improves, that makes life easier, that inspires people? What would you put on there?
Mine would be, put yourself in the mind of the very light non-buyer.
Okay. Put yourself in the shoes, you said? In the mind. Yeah, okay. Be empathetic for those people that are just,
Well, I just think we spend so much time understanding, and people can profile their heavy customers and all that. The real secret to growth is being able to put yourself in the mind of someone knows very little about the category, knows very little about the brand. If you can get their attention and you can embed your brand in their brains, you'll get all the rest. They're easy. The other people are easy, and that's, that's the thing. So and I mean, if for those of you who like numbers and work in packaged goods, if you had a screensaver, I would say take the brand purchase frequency distribution and put that on your screensaver. The number of people in a category in a time period that buy your brand 0 times, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, etc. Because that does the same thing in numbers.
It makes you humble. It makes you humble how often people actually buy you.
The vast majority of people don't buy your brand at all, or maybe last year only bought it once. Yeah. And then you start thinking, okay, so someone who bought my brand last year once, how easy would it have been them not to do that and still have not realized it come the end of the year?
And that's
the number. That's the wonky stats version of the phrase. So pick your words or your distributions depending on what your audience likes.
Yeah. And if people are still, wondering if this is actually true, I recently read that even in cigarettes that are an addictive product, the light buyers dominate the category. The people that buy 1 to 10 packs a year, those are the ones that make the majority of purchases. So if there was ever any doubt that this is true, I think this was, for me, definitely, it drove home the message.
My colleague John Dawes did that. But also, I mean, remember that data doesn't include the people who just bum a cigarette at the pub or at a bar when they've had a few drinks. Right. I reckon if they had added those into the equation, they'd show you the extra light.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I'm one of those party smokers. After the fourth beer, it's a ritual. It's something that happens, and I still enjoy it while knowing that it's not good for my health.
But even that's the extra light buyers that were not even included in that data because that data's not collected.
Totally agreed. Jenni, this was truly an amazing hour with you. Thank you very much. My sincere thanks for your time, your research, and your generosity to share those insights. If people want to find you, what would be the best channel to point them towards? LinkedIn. Okay, LinkedIn. Well, I wish you all the best for your endeavors, and I look forward to your next book.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
Thank you very much. Und das war eine weitere Episode von Markenkraft. Vielen Dank, dass Sie dabei waren. Wir hoffen, es hat Ihnen genauso viel Freude gemacht wie uns. Wenn ja, empfehlen Sie uns, Ihren Freunden, Ihren Bekannten, Ihren Kollegen und bewerten Sie uns auf iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Soundcloud, egal wo Sie diesen Podcast hören. Share the love for brands. Machen Sie es gut für sich und die Menschen in Ihrem